This is the MixCoach podcast. On this episode, we're going to be talking about some reference mixes and how to use them in your mix. Something I was thinking about for the podcast this week. I wrote an article, I guess it was a week or so ago now, about reference mixes, and I wanted to chat a little bit with you about like how you use reference mixes, and we can kind of have a discussion about like what reference mixes are to us and how we go about using them, as well as maybe even what are some of our favorite mixes to reference.
Wow. Okay, that's a great question. Reference mixing is something that as you know. I'm pretty adamant about when I'm mixing, and it seems like whenever I've missed the ball a little bit on mixing, it's usually because I either didn't reference mix or I didn't listen to something to kind of get acclimated to a style of music or a band or something like that, or I referenced the wrong one. Even as recently as the last project I mixed, it's something that this is not something I just talk about. It's something I actively do. I did reference mixing on this last project that I did, but I didn't do it until after I had sent the first draft because I was already it was one of those projects that was like, okay, when's the deadline on this? And they say, well, last week was when we should have had it turned in. So I'm working diligently. So I'm trying to get used to a new room. And so I'm not used to everything. I even listened on headphones and stuff, but I didn't reference the right or any to begin with, any reference mix. And when it came back, it was like, hey, so all of the mixes, the bass is too loud. So I'm like, I know exactly what you're talking about. So then I took my first draft of my mixes, took them to, listen to them in my studio, which surprisingly, the studio that I was currently in at the time, the room I was in, I didn't have it bass trapped like I had my studio in Nashville, and so the low end was not that much different. It was only different on a certain pair of headphones, which I used. I picked up from a buddy of mine, Van Atkins. He always uses these Yamaha RHM5s, and when I listened to it on that, it was like a huge difference. And otherwise, if I wouldn't have used a reference mix and listened to it in my car on headphones, a couple pairs of headphones and several different pairs of speakers, I probably would have said, well, you're crazy. This low end is not out of control. The bass is not too loud, because on 2 of the 3 sets of speakers that I listened to it on, it was not. It sounded fine. But when I found that perfect speaker combination, which in this case was the RHM5s, which on the 5 Things Every Great Mixer Knows series is one of the sets of headphones that I recommend, and they're $50. So I got in trouble just recently for forgetting my own rules about reference mixing.
It's interesting. And I guess rewinding a little bit and saying, if for anybody who hasn't encountered that term before, what we're talking about is reference mixing is comparing your mix to a commercially released song. And most of the time, like, that should be in the same style as whatever you're working on, that sort of thing. And or maybe even just, it doesn't necessarily have to be like the best mix you've ever heard, but if you're trying to replicate something that is close to what they've done on a commercially released record, referencing that. So for example, if it's like, oh, I want the drum sound of this, or I want to get close to the guitar tone on this other song, like a John Mayer song or something like that, and so referencing those mixes would be, hey, let's pull those into the session and bounce back and forth occasionally, just to see, to gauge how far along in the process we are, like how close are we to the final product. So something that, I think about, like, methods that I've used whenever I've been mixing and intentionally reference mixing, where I'm comparing mine against a commercially released thing, and saying, oh, how tight is the low end, those types of things. Whenever I was first starting out mixing, I would basically set a timer. It's like I would have like a little stopwatch next to me. And it's like, okay, so you have your cell phone, you have a little timer on your cell phone, and I would set it for whatever duration that I wanted to check. And so that would be if it was like 15-minute time periods or 30-minute time periods, and basically just hit it and then after that timer goes up, just check it against the other mix and be like, am I closer or farther than last time? And that gives you a gauge, moving forward to where it's like, okay, you may not need it that frequently. You may not need it, you may be able to do something where it's like, oh, I'm gonna check my mix early on or check it later on in the process and be fine. But like whenever you're first starting out learning to mix and whenever you're kind of diving in there, I always talk to the pros, the pro member community here at MixCoach, and talk to them about that timer is a good way to go and a good way to learn how to gauge whether your mix is better or potentially farther away from where it needs to be. So I mean that was one of the methods that I used.
One thing I want to jump in there and say, there is a fine line. Now I realize that there is a fine line here between comparing yourself to another mixer and actually making sure that you're looking at the map basically and trying to get to the right place.
Right.
I think you setting a timer is a great way to do that, to say, hey, I'm not going to try to get my mix to sound just exactly like this. But
right.
I want to make sure that, my motto is always to say, does my mix sound like it could be the very next song on the record that I like? And I'm usually okay with that because, it could be that, I'm trying to, like you said, a John Mayer thing, but but mine has strings on it maybe, or brass or something that you rarely hear on the record that you're referencing. You don't want to try to get it to sound exactly like that because it's a different
right.
song that has breath and life, and you're trying to make it all it can be, and you're not trying to make it the other song. So I think what you're saying is really cool. I think if you can set yourself a timer and not try to nail it, do what you can in that time period, and I think that'll keep you off the ropes of saying, oh man, this is never going to sound like this song, and then kind of throwing up your hands. So
yeah, because we always talk about how mixing it's a lot of the smaller things, and again, like that method is more for whenever you're just starting out, and if you find yourself and you're within the first learning phases of learning to mix, right? And you find yourself at the end of the day going, man, why does my rock mix never sound like this other really amazing commercially released rock mix? And this is a good way to get closer to that and to kind of, like you said, it's never like you're trying to copy it. It's not like you're trying to copy a Chris Lord-Alge mix. It's not like you're trying to even necessarily, borrow any of the same things, but it's like you're gauging how it stacks up with something that is commercial, something that is out there in the wild, and something you deemed to be a really solid mix. Yeah. Now, there's two different things that I would think about whenever I'm choosing what are my reference mixes. Like, where do we get these? The first type is basically if you ask a client and say, hey, this album that we're mixing, is there anything that's commercially released that you are really digging that would potentially be in the same ballpark as this, And so like, essentially you're asking them like, hey, is there anything I should listen to that will inform me about how you want this to sound? And so it's like, you're kind of getting on the same page in that way. And so that, that act alone can really put you in the same kind of creative space as a client. Yeah. And that's a really handy way to handle that. The other side of this is like mixes that I personally have just been rocking on and listening to I usually say nothing should be younger than a year on it. If I've been rocking on a song and it's like I consistently go back to it and say, I want to listen to that song because it sounds really good for more than a year, it's like that's whenever we enter should I put this in my reference mixes playlist? And typically like those things, like some of them are even like cautionary tales where it's like the low end, everything is perfect on this except the low end is pretty out of control on this song. And so it's like, if I have a song that it's like, well, the low end sounds like that other song, that song that I have in my playlist there, that I think the low end's out of control on, typically I will tone back my low end or something like that. So there are cautionary tales in there as well, but I have a huge playlist of a lot of different genres, of things that have proven themselves over the test of time, over a year or more. And I've said, hey, this is consistently a good mix. Every place that I've listened to this, whether it was my iPhone, whether it was like my car, heard it on the radio in a doctor's office sometime or whatever, and basically it's all sounded good. It's always a great mix. And those are the songs that I typically throw on my playlist.
Yeah, I'll mention. You mentioned this song is great except the low end is out of control. I call that the anti-reference mix because, you listen to a song and you say, okay, I know that the top end is good here, but the low end, I would love it if the low end would have been tighter on this mix. And then you go about your mix as if you're trying to tighten, you're making your low end a little bit tighter. Sometimes you're not trying to strive above a certain benchmark of the reference mix. Sometimes you're trying to overcome the downsides of the reference mix that you're listening to, which is perfectly fine. I call that the anti reference mix. Another thing, and one more thing I want to mention too, is I've done this before. I can tell you my tales of woe, and maybe somebody can avoid this. I'll mention specific names a little bit. You know who Max Martin is, right? He produced a project for a girl in Europe somewhere. Her name was Robin, Robyn, and I just thought that was such a great record. I mean, it was everything about that record to me was awesome. I would listen to it and I would get fired up. It was one of those records to me that made me want to be a producer. It made me want to mix. It made me want to do, stretch out into different styles of music and stuff. So I was mixing this country record. And I was, we had the budget to do mastering, and we had the budget for me to spend a little extra time on it. And so I mixed the record and made everybody happy with the mix. And then at the last minute, I took the Robyn record with this country thing, which they're not even close. And back then, country is a little bit more EDM and pop these days. But back in what would it have been the late 90s and the early 2000s, country was still country. And here I was trying to reference the wrong reference mix, and I totally screwed up the project at the last minute by using the wrong reference mix. So what you're saying about getting on the same page with your client and making sure that you don't go rogue on trying to figure out what it should sound like at the last minute, I think if you can keep that intact, the project will be better as a result of it. Just make sure you don't reference the wrong mix.
Right. I definitely think like if you're mixing something and it's like, well, I don't know if if I have a quote unquote reference mix, if I have that great mix in this genre, then seeking that out and trying to find, hey, what do other people think are great mixes in that style? Like other really respected mixers that that sort of thing. So I think you're right on there where it's like, well, you don't want to use something that's vastly different. I also think like from a creative standpoint, sometimes that can be interesting. If you're trying to push the envelope and if the artist is trying to like push the envelope as far as a genre goes, using something that's a little bit out of the style or just barely out of the style is fine. But like you said, it's like you don't want to put like a EDM kind of bass into a bluegrass song. Like that just doesn't work. Mm-hmm. You don't want to try to get the same low end out of that style of music as you would have in like a EDM or hip hop song or something like that. So those are the ways that I find that. Do you want to list anything that like you think of as like your like reference mix? Is there anything that comes to like top of the mind type of reference mixes?
Yeah, let's see. As far as country, there's a guy named Randy Houser that there's a song called "How Country Feels," and my buddy Taylor Pollard, who used to work at Sony, I think he still does. He referenced this one time, and I was like, "Wow, what is that?" Or maybe I even asked him, so what's got you fired up right now? What do you? I mean, and listen, just a little sidebar here. You don't have to just ask your clients. Ask guys that you trust, who have good ears. Hey, what's got you fired up? What mixes are you loving right now? That's what I did with Taylor, and he said, "Have you heard Randy Houser's new record?" And I said, "No," and he played "How Country Feels," and to me, that's one of the best sounding country records I've heard. As far as bluegrass, if it's not traditional bluegrass, Alison Krauss, her stuff is really, really good. As far as like kind of traditional bluegrass, my buddy mixes. His name is Van Atkins. He mixes the Lonesome. I think it's a Lonesome River Band. It's a bluegrass band, but they have an electric bass instead of an acoustic bass. So that's the difference. The bass is a little bit a little bit different. But that's what you're talking about, the anti-referencing. I listen to everything else on there. I've always loved their records. I love the production of their records, and so but I can't really make an acoustic bass sound like an electric bass. So I have to kind of leave that off the checklist. But yeah, Randy Houser, Alison Krauss for country, for bluegrass. Let's see. The Wallflowers, One Headlight is one of my personal favorite rock
that's
songs.
One of the ones I always go back to as well. Just the way that mix feels and the way that everything is laid out in it is really great.
I listen to a lot of Michael Bublé as far as big band. I also love Tony Bennett. Any of his duets records are great to me. And then the Lord, what is that? What's the name of the song?
Pure Heroine. That's the name of the album.
What's the name of the song?
There's a couple of them. So Buzzcut Season off of that album is really good, but there's also Royals.
Right. Royals is when I bought my monitors. That's the ones that was demoed to me on those monitors, and I was like, wow, that's a lot of low end that you don't hear in the car. You don't hear on earbuds, and it's a whole different dimension. But yeah, those are some of the ones that I listen to. There's another one that Michael Jackson did, and I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, I went to a conference the other day with front of house mixers, and they were talking about some of their favorite front of reference mixes for front of house. So this doesn't just work in the studio. To me, it's one of those things where, let's just say you're running front of house at your church. Before anybody gets there, you want to kind of get a vibe for what the room can do. Then put a song in there that sounds great everywhere, and then try to make that song, find out. It's the anti-reference mix at this point. You listen to this song and go, wow, the low end on this particular song is usually crazy good, but in this room it sounds really, really light and non-existent. Then you kind of know where you need to spend your attention and your time to.
Yeah, I think along those terms, like something else I just thought of that I wanted to bring up here is whenever you wake up every day, like your ears are slightly different, and you may be perceiving there to be less or more low ends depending on the day. So reference mixes can really help to start off your day and attune your ears to like what is the true center, like what is true north whenever it comes to a great mix. And so starting off your day, before you start mixing a song, listening to a great mix and going, okay, now I know what a great mix sounds like. And I can go and try to achieve that. Just starting it out that way, and in a live scenario, it's going to be the same thing. And so, like, I think that's a really cool way to start. Some of my favorite reference mixes, the One Headlight song by Wallflowers, like I said, like that. There's an exercise in there in automation as well, because you think about that song, there's never a dull moment. You're led through that mix, and even if you just were to remove the vocals, there's something interesting going on at every second in that song. And so that's what you should strive for in your automation as well. So not just from a tonal perspective, but from a automation and delivery perspective of a story throughout the song, a story in the instruments throughout the song. Over the Rhine has a Live from Nowhere album, and there's a song on there called it's Live from Nowhere Volume 2. It's called Little Did I Know, and that's kind of like an acoustic song, but it's like a really great like if you're doing like an acoustic thing with a fiddle and a bass, an electric bass, and that sort of thing, that's a really great song to listen to. Michael Bublé obviously has some great stuff. Moondance, that song specifically, like I always go back to that for like brass and things. From other genres, Switchfoot's Lonely Nation song from their Nothing is Sound album. Like Switchfoot has some really good stuff from a consistency and like volume perspective, where it's like, man, this thing is going to be consistent and consistent tonally from place to place. So that they feel really good for like rock stuff. As far as bluegrass goes, I always go back to the Dolly Parton album, The Grass is Blue, and like Cash on the Barrelhead, if you wanted a specific song from that. Like that feels so good. All of those instruments, it feels very full. So as far as like other pop kind of styles, there's an album from Tuvlo from a couple years back. The song Talking Body is a really great for like pop reference mixing. From EDM and also translating into pop, the biggest addition that I've had, I guess, in the past 2 years now, is from a group called Major Lazer. And it's the song "Lean On," and that is a song like you know the song. Everybody knows the song. It's been in commercials. It's on the radio everywhere. But every single time I've heard it, every single time, it has been consistently a great mix. Even if it's on tiny little speakers, if it's on gigantic speakers, it feels consistent and great. So that one has been like the most recent addition kind of to this playlist. That entire Lord album, Pure Heroin, is really good. Like I said, Buzzcut Season is really nice. There's actually in that one, it's unique in that, and it makes the list specifically, like that song specifically makes the list because the low end, there's a panning kick trick that they do. Where it kind of goes left, right, center. And so if you want to figure out like what is the localization of the low end like, then you can pop on that song and hear, okay, so left, right, center, and you know, lesser monitors. If you're in a room without like great localization or without, you know, proper treatment, that sort of thing, the kick won't move. Like you won't feel the panning on that. But in a great room and whenever everything is set up well, you'll feel that kick move from left to right and then center. And it's a very cool song in and of itself. So, but those are just some of mine and why I have them on there. So if anybody wants to check all those out, they should. Again, I wrote kind of, you know, the article about it, about my kind of experiences with this. And I wanted to have this, you know, discussion with you about it because everybody kind of has their own. Everybody has their own experiences with reference mixing, and everybody really attaches to certain songs. And so what other people will find helpful may not be what we find helpful. And obviously there's numerous different genres that you can pull from. And I would just encourage everyone, like whatever those mixes are, go ahead and start throwing those in a playlist. Put those together somewhere. Like keep some sort of a list to where that way the next time somebody, you know, puts you in front of a new system, you have a playlist that you can pull up and say, okay, I'm going to plug in my phone. I'm going to listen to this stuff. And I know where the holes are in this system and in this room. And then additionally, if somebody throws you a song in a genre you're not used to mixing, you at the very least know what the gold standard for that genre is. Yeah, to you anyway.
Yeah, I recommend that, you know, mixers, if you're starting out and you want to be serious about mixing, and to me, you know, being consistent is the name of the game on mixing, especially after you get established a little bit. So you know, find out what those gold standards are and go ahead and start reference mixing. Even if you don't tell anyone right now, I know that, you know, we would all like to say, yeah, I didn't listen to anything. It's just what came out of my brain, man. You know, we'd all like to say that, but you know, we're all learning. I'm a student first and foremost. I'm trying to learn all the time. I learn from a lot of people. And one of the things, you know, that you have to do is just, you know, kind of swallow your pride sometime and say, okay, my exercise today is to, you know, make my mix sound like this mix.
Yeah. And even at that, like you think about, like who doesn't want a big playlist of amazing mixes?
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you brought that up, John. You know, one last thing I would love for people to do is underneath this podcast on MixCoach, let's maybe we can start a list of reference mixes that people like. Because I would love, like I said, I'm a learner. I wanna know what people are listening to and digging and what they love about it. That's what I would love to see is hey, listen to this song by this artist and this is what to listen for. That song I couldn't think of just a second ago was Michael Jackson Jam. Not the remastered version, but the other one. I mean, Michael Jackson's stuff was just amazing, sonically.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And there's so much stuff going on in there that you can listen to it and listen through the layers, and that it's an amazing practice in production and mixing. If you really want to move the needle on your mixing, the best way to get better is to mix consistently, ask questions, and get feedback. That's why every month, a MixCoach member, we give members a session download, a video tutorial covering that session, a live Q&A webinar with Kevin and John, and the chance for mixed feedback from coaches. Go ahead and head over to MixCoach Member.